advanced floating. In my last video, I showed you the basics of how to float with acrylic paints. And now we're going to go on and learn some advanced techniques that are used for creating form in acrylics. So I'm going to load my brush in the same way that I normally would load my brush to float. And then this time when I touch my brush down, I'm doing the little pity pad pull. And then what I'm going to do is simply overlap. Now the one thing I want to point out is my brush is in a 30-degree position and it's slightly tipped towards the water edge of the brush. This allows me to continue going out without hardly any streaking in the brush. The reason I like the pity pat pull is because with these more advanced techniques, you really need to have control over your brush. So if I had a curved or curvy section that I was painting, I could still walk up my brush because I'm using these little teeny pity pat pulls instead of pulling a straight line. That's much harder to do than this. Now, why do you need to be able to walk out a float? Well, one of the reasons is when you're creating realistic form, you can see how wide the shade is. This was my base coat color, and now my first shade came all the way here, and then my second shade came up to here. So if I were just simply to pull one stroke along the edge, no matter how wide I loaded this, it would not cover the entire area that needed to be shaded. So what I want to do is come in and walk it out and bring it to the point where I'm going to start creating, and in this case this is a sphere, and so I want to make sure that I'm rounding this out. If it's just on the edge, you have no place to go with your second shade color or your third shade color, and also you're not going to create true dimension in your paintings. Now there's another version that's generally used for highlights called a back-to-back float. The first thing I do is just barely dampen my surface, and that's just to help the paint blend together. So what I do then is I pull my float, then I turn it over, and I'm going to come and meet this. And generally this is used for a highlight. So you can see we have opaque in the middle, and then it comes out with our gradation of color. Now this size float would be used more for a final glint. So if you were going to really put in your first shade, let's say for a cylinder shape, and again I would dampen it, I'm using very little water, and then I come out and I walk out my highlight. Then again I flip it over very quickly and I come and I meet it, and I walk it out the other way. So we have a little bit more bold color in the middle, and then we have our gradation of color as we go. So if you were painting a cylinder, this would be the beginning of a nice highlight. Now you can also highlight a cone shape with a back-to-back float, but it's going to be just a little bit different shape. So here's my first example, and again I'm going to come in and dampen it. But I think I'm going to use the black just so you can see it a little bit better. So I'm going to start out at the bottom making a wider float, and I'm walking it out. Then as I bring it forward, it's going to get more narrow and narrow. And I actually use the clean side of my brush to clean up that edge. Then I flip it over and I meet this. And again, I walk it out this way and start bringing it up. And then I use the clean side of my brush. So this is a very difficult float. So now let's see what it looks like as if I'm actually putting in a highlight. The reason I'm dampening it is I want to make sure I have enough moisture there to move the paint. So I'm going to come into the middle. I think I have just a little bit too much moisture. Remember I said do not have a lake on there. So what I want to do is just blot it. So I'm going to come in, bring it up, walk it out. Now this time I'm actually going to reload my brush and come back and meet it. I'm walking it out and bringing it up. And if need be, I just clean up my edges. So you can see how that's starting to form a highlight. Now we're going to let that dry. And there's another way to create a highlight for a cone shape, and that's with a tornado float. So with a tornado float, this also is walking out a float. So you begin with a wide float, and then what happens is as you come up, you make smaller strokes. And then I just go in and clean up my edges. So you can see that's also a triangular shape. Now when you're shading a cone, this is the time when you need to be able to get into those little corners. And you do actually use a little bit of a walked out float. And that's why the first thing you need to practice is how to walk out a float. And then you can come back and do these more difficult floats. So when I'm going to come in and shade this, I have to make sure that I fill in this area. As acrylic painters, I often see people want to just kind of outline the object. But that would not be the case. You need to make sure that with this cone shape, it's going to have a little bit more narrow, and then it's going to come wide, and then if need be, you can shade it along the bottom. But you can see how this is all filled in. And then I always go back and clean up my edges. And this is an extreme value jump. Generally, you would not have such a big jump from this light gray to black, but I want to make sure that you can see it. So now, I have said that I use the acrylic layering technique. So as you can see that this is not a perfectly formed highlight. And so what I'll do then is I'll go back in and I'll reinforce it. With each layer, it becomes more smooth and more even. So I'm going to come in and walk it out like I did before. Then I'm going to flip my brush over and come back the other way. So you can see how much more bold this is compared to this first highlight. Each time I reinforce it, it's going to build the intensity or the boldness and brightness of it. And it's also going to make it more smooth and even. Now the last thing I want to do is discuss circular floats. And this would be used in the case of creating a sphere. So what I can do is just put a little dot there so you know that's where my brush is going to sit down each time. And so I'm going to make some little pitty-pat pulls, and then I turn the surface. And again, my brush is laying right where that dot was. And I do a few more pitty-pat pulls. And I continue in this method, turning the surface until I have completed a full circle. And I really like using a flat brush if this is like a final glit, because it adds those little like sunbeam rays to it. However, one of the advantages of using a filbert brush is it kind of eliminates that. So I'll come in and I just am going in the same circular motion as I did before. So you can see that this is a little bit more smooth and this has little teeny like sunbeams, and all the only difference is the different type of brush that I used. I also want to discuss pulling shades in circular objects. It's very important that we're going to pull in more of a C shape. So as I begin, I do like a little chisel pull and then come down and end with my chisel. And again, if I need to, I clean up the edge with my water side of my brush. So you can see how that's already looking nice and round. This would be very difficult to do if I tried to pull it just in one stroke. And also you would get a very linear, more narrow float. This way I'm starting to get a little bit more dimension, and I can always go back and reinforce it to build up the color, because again, this is the acrylic layering technique. Now there's another variation of a circular float, and that's an oval float. And it's a combination of both a back-to-back and circular float. In the case of a leaf, this is where I would use an oval float. So what I would do is I'd come in and start with my regular float. Then I'm starting to curve it around. And when I end with a circular float at the end. So you can see the shape of the highlight is an oval. So where do we use these floats? Well, I've already discussed how we would have to walk out a float here. This is where we would use a circular float. Over here is where I used an oval float. In some of the areas that are very small, this is where I would use a triangular shape, where you can see there's a triangle right there, and I would just walk it out. You need to look at the object that you're painting, and that will determine what type of more advanced float that you're going to be using. Obviously, if you have a sphere, chances are you're going to be using a circular float, and the same with the leaves, you'll be using an oval float. Or if you were to have a cylinder, you would be using just a walked out float and a back-to-back float. I hope that learning about these different types of advanced floats has really helped you, and that you will be able to go on and learn how to create form. In my next video, I will show you how I create form using these floats. Thanks for joining me today for Advanced Floating Techniques. I hope you're enjoying these videos and that you will subscribe to my channel. Please give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time. Bye.